They call it the guest wing, but it's really just the back corner of the house, the part furthest from the laughter. It has a private entrance and a kitchenette, which sounds nice when you say it out loud, but it feels more like a holding pen, like I'm allowed to be here, just not seen. I'm 72. I used to be a teacher, literature mostly. Before that, I was a mother, and before that, a dreamer. I had plans once. I wanted to write a book, see Rome, maybe even learn how to dance without worrying who was watching, but life had other ideas. I got married young, became a widow even younger, and raised my son, Adam, alone. I poured everything into him. Every ounce of love, every dollar, every hope. When Adam and Monica bought this house 5 years ago, I offered to help. I sold my own little cottage, the one I'd gardened in for nearly 3 decades, and handed over the proceeds. Monica called it a generous investment in the future. At the time, I believed her. I thought I'd be part of that future. Now I know better. Dinner time used to be my favorite part of the day. I'd cook something warm and familiar, my lemon rosemary chicken, or the potato gratin Adam used to request for his birthdays. But lately, Monica insists on tweaking everything. Too much salt, she'll say, pushing the plate aside, or we're trying to eat cleaner. Maybe no butter next time? Sometimes she just remakes the dish entirely after I've left the kitchen. As if my food, and by extension, I need fixing. The conversations at the table aren't any better. I'll start to say something, a memory, a bit of news, and Monica will cut in. Change the subject, talk over me. It's subtle at first, but consistent. Over time, I've learned to go quiet. It's easier than forcing my way in. Last week, I wore a silk scarf to brunch, one Adam gave me on Mother's Day years ago. Monica looked me up and down and laughed. That's festive, trying to make a statement? I smiled. Just felt like adding some color today. She raised an eyebrow and said, well, good for you. Age is just a number, right? There was a tone to it, that sharp-edged politeness that cuts deeper than outright rudeness. But yesterday was different. Yesterday, she didn't bother with politeness. Adam was hosting a few colleagues for dinner. I wasn't really invited, but I helped anyway, setting the table, preparing the salad, fluffing the pillows. At one point, I offered to refill someone's glass, just trying to be helpful. Monica stepped in, smiled tightly, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, maybe sit this one out, okay? Just act your age, you're kind of embarrassing. It landed like a slap. A hot, stinging flush crept up my neck. No one said anything. Adam looked away. The room got quiet, just for a second, then someone cleared their throat and the conversation rolled on. But I stayed frozen in place. Act your age. As if aging were a performance and I'd missed the cue, as if dignity had an expiration date. As if, after giving everything I had to this family, my presence was now something to be managed. Minimized. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my little room, the one they call the guest suite, though no guests ever come here. I looked at the lines around my mouth, the silver streaks in my hair. I didn't feel embarrassed, I felt angry. And beneath that, I felt erased. I thought of my old classroom, the way students used to hang on my every word when I read them poetry, the way Adam used to clap when I sang in the kitchen. I used to matter. I used to be someone. Now, now I'm something between a burden and a background prop. I gave them everything. My home, my time, my love, and somehow I became nothing, but something shifted in me that night, a flicker I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was something older. A voice I thought I'd lost. Whatever it was, it whispered, you're still here, you still count, and maybe, just maybe, I don't have to fade. Maybe it's time to rise. Maybe I'll show them exactly what it means to act my age. There's a kind of silence that's worse than noise. It's the kind you learn to carry. The kind you wear like a second skin so you don't take up too much space. That silence became my armor in this house. It wasn't always like this. In the early days, when I first moved in, Monica at least pretended to be warm. She called me mom, let me cook sometimes, even brought me herbal tea when I had a cold. But the more rooted she became in this house, my house, really, when you trace the money, the more I faded into the wallpaper. The shift was gradual, like being erased one faint line at a time. Then came the party. A company gathering, or maybe one of her networking events. I don't even remember the excuse. What I remember is her knocking on my door that morning with a bright, fake smile. Hey, just a heads up, we're having about 30 people over tonight. Could you maybe stay in your room or just head out for a while? I don't want the guests getting confused about who lives here, you know? I blinked. Confused? She shrugged, brushing invisible lint off her blouse. It's just, it's better if they think it's Adam and me. Simple, clean. You get it, right? I didn't answer. Not with words. I just nodded and gently shut the door. Confused. As if my mere presence would muddy the picture she wanted to paint of a flawless young couple living in a polished, stylish home, unburdened by reminders of aging or sacrifice. I wasn't part of her aesthetic. Later, I watched the party unfold through the slats of my blinds. I saw people sipping wine in the garden I used to tend. I saw laughter echo off walls I helped pay for. And I saw Adam, my son, smiling next to Monica, not once glancing toward my wing. The next morning, my reading chair was gone. It had been in the sunroom, a faded but sturdy thing with floral upholstery and a squeaky armrest. It was where I read to Adam as a child, where I sat with tea and a mystery novel most mornings. I asked about it gently, still hoping it had been moved. Oh, Monica said casually, buttering toast. I tossed it. It was old and didn't match the vibe. We're redoing the space. Think modern coastal. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My hands trembled slightly. That chair had been mine, a piece of comfort, memory, and presence, and now it was gone. Adam noticed my face. Come on, Mom, he said quietly. It's just a chair. Just a chair, like I was just a guest, just a burden, just in the way. The worst part? I started to believe it. I began second-guessing every word, every step, every outfit. Was my cardigan too bright? Was my perfume too much? Was I sitting too long in the living room? Even the children noticed. My youngest granddaughter, Lily, once giggled and said, Grandma tells the same stories over and over. Her older brother chimed in, Yeah, she's silly, like a cartoon character. They weren't being cruel, they were just repeating what they saw and heard. One night, while cleaning the kitchen, I dropped a plate. It shattered against the tile, and I gasped. Monica rushed in, not with concern, but with an eye roll. Jesus, can you be more careful? Seriously, this is why I asked Adam to get paper plates. I swept the pieces silently, blinking fast to hold back tears. Adam wasn't home. I felt more like an unpaid maid than a family member. The next morning, I went to the senior center for my weekly bingo and tea. It was the only place left where people asked me questions and actually waited for the answers. My friend Gloria, silver hair always pinned perfectly, lipstick never smudged, reached across the table and touched my hand. You were never this quiet, she said. What happened to your spark? I laughed, a brittle, tired sound. Maybe I got old, she narrowed her eyes. No, you got buried, that's different. I didn't respond, but her words echoed through me for the rest of the week, buried. That's exactly how I felt. Like I'd been gently, politely covered in layers of smiles and silence, until I barely remembered what it felt like to speak with fire. Later that evening, I sat alone in my small living space, staring at the empty corner where my chair used to be. I sipped tea that had gone cold long ago and thought of all the things I hadn't said. I used to speak in front of classrooms. I used to march for change. I used to matter. I'd allowed myself to be muted, not all at once, but piece by piece. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe that spark Gloria talked about was still there, not extinguished, just waiting. Waiting for a reason to blaze again. The thing about silence is that after a while you start to mistake it for peace. But it isn't. It's just the absence of noise, not the presence of joy. That night, after Gloria's words stayed with me like a heartbeat in my ears, you got buried, not old, I couldn't sleep. I made tea, then forgot about it. Instead, I opened the hallway closet, the one Monica called storage, though I always knew it held more than dust and forgotten holiday decor. Behind a box of broken vases and tangled lights, I found it, my old cedar trunk. The lid creaked open like an exhale from another life. Inside, the past waited for me. There were stacks of newspaper clippings, yellowed at the edges. One read, Local teacher rallies community around new women's shelter, my picture just beneath, in a denim blazer and hoop earrings, hand raised mid-speech. I lifted a bundle of letters tied in twine. Handwritten notes from former students. Some thanked me for introducing them to poetry. Others said my class gave them the courage to speak up at home. One wrote, You saw me before I saw myself. My throat tightened. I reached in further, a stack of old syllabi typed on my first electric typewriter. A folded program from a protest march we organized for wage equality. A scarf from a writing retreat. Photos from storytelling festivals where I stood behind a podium, hands flying with passion. I hadn't thought about that version of myself in years. After my husband, Raymond, passed when Adam was just 6, I packed away more than just these items. I packed away myself. I told myself Adam needed all of me and that my time would come later. But later never came. Instead, life narrowed down to parenting, surviving, helping Adam through college, then watching from the edges as he built his own family. Monica didn't know that version of me. To her, I was the old woman in the guest room, the one who meant well but didn't quite belong. But I remembered. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror and fastened the same silver earrings I wore in that newspaper photo. Big, round, unapologetically bold. The kind Monica had once called a bit much. Then I pulled out a coral-colored scarf from the trunk and wrapped it around my neck. I didn't care if it matched. I walked to the library that day, a place I hadn't visited in years. The scent of old pages, sun-faded carpet, and faint lemon cleaner felt like a reunion. I asked the young woman at the front desk if they had any writing groups. She lit up. "We just started a memoir circle for women over 60. You'd be perfect." Perfect? I hadn't heard that word applied to me in years. 2 days later, I sat among a dozen women, widows, divorcees, former nurses, and secretaries, a retired park ranger, all reading pieces of their lives out loud. When it was my turn, I trembled. Then I opened one of my old lesson plans and began to share a story about teaching the Odyssey to a group of bored teenagers who ended up crying during the final class. When I finished, they clapped, not politely, not softly. It echoed. After the meeting, I walked to a nearby cafe and saw someone waving at me through the window. Lorraine. Same cheekbones, same knowing smirk, just a few more laugh lines. We hugged so tightly I felt the years collapse between us. We talked for hours about our old protests, our students, our dreams. She laughed when I told her about Monica's comment. "Act your age," she scoffed. "Honey, acting your age means remembering who you are and daring the world to catch up." That line lodged somewhere deep in my chest. We started meeting every week. I tagged along with her to her community events, fundraisers, open mics, neighborhood cleanups. I even signed up to volunteer at the Children's Storytelling Hour on Saturdays. The first time I read Charlotte's Web aloud, I cried before the kids did. Something was happening. Not loudly, not suddenly, but surely. One morning, I walked into the kitchen wearing a turquoise shawl I'd knitted 20 years ago and my old canvas tote with literary quotes stamped across it. Monica raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's colorful," she said, gesturing vaguely at me. I smiled, setting the kettle on the stove. "Isn't it? I missed color." She blinked, unsure how to respond. I didn't wait for her to figure it out. Later that afternoon, I printed out a schedule of local poetry nights and pinned it to the corkboard in my guest wing. My space. I even taped one to the fridge just to see what she'd do. That evening in my room, I sat down and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Act my age, I am, and it feels damn good." Because I hadn't disappeared, I'd only been hiding. And now I was stepping back into the light, one word, one scarf, one story at a time. Sunday morning smelled like citrus, rosemary, and performance. Monica was hosting a brunch for what she called her circle, a curated group of women she described with words like well-connected, visionary, and real players. These were the women whose opinions shaped fundraising boards, social media campaigns, and exclusive garden clubs. Women Monica desperately wanted to impress. I'd offered to help, of course. It's what I do. I made 2 quiches, one spinach and feta, one caramelized onion and gruyere. Recipes I'd perfected over years of family gatherings, potlucks, and school functions. Back when I was the woman other women came to for advice and flavor. As I moved through the kitchen, whisking, chopping, and sliding trays into the oven, Monica flitted in and out like a dragonfly on espresso, checking her reflection, adjusting throw pillows, spritzing overpriced linen spray into the air. "You don't have to overdo it," she muttered, eyeing my flour-dusted apron. "Just keep it simple." I said nothing. Just placed the quiches in the warming oven and wiped down the counter. By 11:30, the house buzzed with high heels and laughter, the sound of curated charm. I stayed mostly in the kitchen. I wasn't told to stay out of sight, but I'd learned the cues. I was useful, not invited. At one point, I stepped out to refresh the buffet. As I placed the quiches on the table, one of Monica's friends, a sharply dressed woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice like champagne, took a bite and paused. "Oh my goodness," she said. "This quiche is divine. Did you cater?" Before I could even smile, Monica was there, hand fluttering in the air. "Oh, that," she laughed. "That's just something she threw together." The way she said it, she like I was the help, or worse, a pet with kitchen privileges. I looked at the guest. She smiled at me politely, but her gaze shifted just as quickly. I was no longer part of the conversation. I retreated to the kitchen. I should have stayed there. An hour later, someone spilled mimosa on the new rug. Monica's nerves began to fray. She darted back into the kitchen, muttering under her breath. "Do you have any club soda?" She asked without looking at me. I handed it to her, but she was already gone. Later, as the women gathered in the living room for dessert, I stepped in to refill the fruit bowl. I wasn't trying to be part of the scene, I just didn't want the strawberries to run out. Old habits. As I passed through the group, one of the guests smiled and said, "You must be Monica's mother-in-law. She's lucky to have such help." I gave a soft laugh. "Just doing what I can." That's when Monica spoke. Her voice was light, but her tone had an edge like a sharpened knife. "Why don't you act your age and stop trying to impress people?" The air thinned. Conversation stalled. Even the sound of a fork tapping a plate froze. The room went silent. I turned slowly to look at her. Her expression was all teeth, a smile barely holding together the contempt behind it. I looked around at the women, all pretending to suddenly be very interested in their empty glasses. I smiled, not broadly, not bitterly, just politely. Then I nodded and walked back to my room. I closed the door gently behind me. My hands shook slightly, not with shock, but with clarity. That was it. That was the moment. I stood in the center of my room, staring at my laptop, and then I sat down. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked, steady and expectant. I didn't hesitate. My fingers moved like they remembered the fire before I did. I wrote about sacrifice, about the invisible labor of women who give everything and are then asked to smile from the sidelines. I wrote about being erased softly, politely, until you forget you ever had a voice. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote for remembrance. For myself, an hour passed, maybe more. I paused only once to whisper out loud. She wanted me to act my age. My eyes narrowed as the words flowed again. Fine, but she forgot my age comes with power she's never dreamed of, because I had lived a life before her. A full, burning, wild, messy, beautiful life. And now, I was ready to live it again, this time with my name on it. The morning after the brunch, I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my tea, laid out my notebook, and made a list at the top of the page in bold black ink: Operation Respect. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about something quieter, something deeper. Reclaiming what I gave away too easily, my dignity. Step 1, legal clarity. I pulled out the manila envelope buried at the back of my desk drawer. Inside were the original sale documents from when I'd sold my home and contributed to the down payment on this one. I remembered every signature, every conversation. But something had always tugged at me, an old instinct from years of managing my husband's estate after he passed. So I'd kept one clause in place, tucked in with the paperwork and barely mentioned. I made an appointment at a law office downtown, a modest little firm run by a woman named Janine who looked younger than my teapot, but had a handshake like steel. We sat down, and I handed her the file. 30 minutes later, she looked up and gave me a smile that made my spine straighten. "You never signed over full ownership," she said. "Technically, you're still a partial title holder. They can't sell, refinance, or legally evict you without your consent." I exhaled, slow and steady. "And," she continued, "because you provided the majority of the initial funds, you have grounds to make a case for primary equity in the property if this were ever to go to court." I didn't need court. I just needed a stage. Step 2, planning my exit and my statement. I withdrew a chunk of savings from the account Adam didn't know existed. The one I opened after my husband died, when I told myself, always keep something just for you, in case the world forgets your name. Then I walked into the old brick building off Jefferson Street, now a thrift boutique, and knocked on the side door. Behind it was the dusty shell of what used to be Haven House, the women's shelter I helped launch in my 30s. I'd organized the fundraising, the supply drives, the legal protection contacts. It had shut down after funding dried up 10 years ago, but the bones were still there. I met with their current board, a handful of young women trying to make miracles with crumbs. When I offered the donation, one of them cried. When I told them I'd also volunteer to help run workshops, another hugged me before I could stop her. Step 3, tell my story on my own terms. I called Lorraine and said 2 words, we're publishing. We joked for years about turning our lives into essays, speeches, maybe a book. Now I wasn't joking. She lit up like the 4th of July. We spent days in her sunroom, typing, editing, drinking too much tea, and occasionally wine. I wrote about the soft violences, the quips, the dismissals, the erasure of older women behind smiles and empty compliments. We called it Act My Age, a memoir in defiance. Lorraine connected me to a small press run by a friend of hers in Asheville. We printed 300 copies, not many, but enough. Enough for what I had planned. Step 4, gather my witnesses. I reached out to former students, the ones I'd taught when Adam was still in diapers. Many of them were grown now. Lawyers, therapists, community organizers, a professor at Duke, a novelist in Chicago. I asked if they would write letters, not to Monica, not even to Adam, but to me. Birthday tributes, I called them, though I knew I was collecting more than wishes. I was collecting proof that I had mattered, that I still did. They came in waves, handwritten, typed, emailed, some even printed on elegant stationery. One wrote, "You were the first woman I saw who led without apology. I never forgot it." Another said, "Every time I speak in front of a room, I channel you." I cried more than once. Step 5, announce the storm. I bought a half-page ad in the local paper, the one Monica's crowd still pretended not to read but always did. It was simple, elegant. Coming this Saturday, a story of silence, age, and rebellion. Act My Age, an evening of words and reckoning. Premiere reading at the family gala. There was no name, no location, but everyone who needed to know would understand. I printed a copy of the ad and tacked it to the back of my closet door. Then I sat down at my desk, lit a lavender candle, and exhaled. It was all in motion now, not chaos, not vengeance, just the truth rising like a tide, and when it reached Monica, she wouldn't see it coming because she never saw me at all. The week leading up to the gala was a performance in itself. Monica was in full command arranging flower deliveries, ordering wine, barking orders at caterers, triple-checking the lighting. She walked through the house like a woman auditioning for a life grander than the one she actually lived. This was her moment. Adam's company was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and Monica made sure the entire guest list reflected their brand: polished, powerful, untouchable. On Friday morning, she knocked lightly on my door. "We'll need the whole downstairs cleared by 4, she said with a syrupy smile. "Just for flow, you know. Feel free to enjoy a movie or something upstairs. I left a fruit plate in the mini fridge." She didn't wait for a response. I closed the door gently behind her. It was a strange feeling, not anger, not quite, something quieter. I felt ready, like the moment before a match is struck. At 5 p.m., I sat upstairs in my little sitting area, dressed not for comfort but for history. I wore a royal blue wrap dress, the one I used to wear when I spoke at school fundraisers. My silver earrings were back on. My red lipstick was sharp, unapologetic. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. Not pretty, not polite. Present. From the window, I watched the lawn fill with guests in suits and pastel dresses, clinking glasses and complimenting Monica's taste in uplighting. The evening progressed as expected. Waiters passed canapes. Laughter floated through the walls. I could almost hear Monica's voice cutting through conversations, saying things like, "Yes, we love the house. It just suits us, doesn't it?" Around 8:15, the string quartet stopped. A light tapping of glass echoed from downstairs, the universal sign that someone was ready to make a toast. I stood, walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately, like a woman returning to her stage. As I stepped into the living room, heads turned, a few widened eyes. One woman clutched her pearls, I kid you not. Monica spotted me halfway through the room and froze, wine glass raised mid-sip. Before she could move, I stepped onto the little platform Adam had set up for his thank you speech. I took the microphone from its stand. The room went still. I smiled. I was asked to act my age, I said, voice steady, clear. So here I am, a 72-year-old woman, mother, teacher, builder, and survivor, acting my age. A ripple of confused smiles, a few laughs, nervous ones. I continued. I gave up my career to raise a son I adored. I built a home. I opened a shelter. I taught hundreds of students how to read between the lines of poetry and of life. And somewhere along the way, I was asked to fade, to shrink, to be quiet. I paused. Monica took a step forward, but Adam reached out instinctively and stopped her. I met her eyes. But silence, I said, is not the same as peace, and being old is not the same as being done. I reached into my handbag and held up a book. The cover read, Act My Age, a memoir in defiance, my name printed boldly beneath. I wrote this, I said, holding it high, not to embarrass anyone, but to remind everyone, especially the women in this room, that aging is not a disappearance, it's a return. From the back of the room, someone clapped, then another, and another. I looked out and saw 3 of my former students standing near the fireplace, now grown men and women, tears in their eyes, applauding like I'd just read them a final chapter they didn't know they'd been waiting for. Monica's friends glanced at each other, uncertain now, their curated smiles flickering. Monica herself stood rigid, as if she'd swallowed something sour. Her glass was still frozen in her hand, her mouth slightly open, like a line she couldn't quite deliver. I leaned toward the mic for the last time. I didn't grow old, I said, letting the words ring like a bell. I grew louder. Then I stepped down. The applause erupted fully now, not polite, not performative, real, raw, a rising tide of sound. I walked straight to the front door, Lorraine already waiting there with my coat and keys. As we stepped out into the cool evening, I didn't look back. I didn't have to, because I knew the echo I'd left behind was louder than anything Monica had tried to build in that house. And for once, finally, the spotlight wasn't hers. It was mine. The walls are thinner here. I can hear my neighbor's television most evenings, and the elevator hums like an old kettle every time it lurches to life. But this little apartment, all 800 square feet of it, is mine. The first morning I woke up here, I stood barefoot in the kitchen and just breathed. No one barking instructions, no whispered insults wrapped in civility, just sunlight on the linoleum and the quiet rustle of pages from a book I left open on the table. It's funny what peace really looks like. I chose this place carefully, 1 block from the senior center, 2 from the library. There's a cafe on the corner that serves the best chai latte I've ever had, and the owner knows my name already. I walk everywhere now. I've joined a poetry group on Thursdays and lead a children's storytelling hour on Saturdays. I even host a monthly women over 60 salon in the community room where we drink wine out of coffee mugs and talk about things our families once told us to keep quiet. And the book, Act My Age, sold out its limited run in 2 weeks. The library requested more copies. Local book clubs started inviting me for readings. Then a community college asked if I'd consider giving a talk on aging and identity. The first time I stood behind a podium again, I felt taller than I had in years. I spoke without notes, without apology. Afterward, a young woman, maybe early 20s, came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "I want to grow into someone like you." I smiled. "Just make sure you don't wait as long as I did." She hugged me. I went home that night, sat by the window, and wrote 3 new chapters for the next book. A week later, there was a knock on my door. Adam, he looked tired, not in the way that says you've had a long day, in the way that says you've been carrying something heavy for too long. I let him in. He sat on my small couch and looked around, as if realizing for the first time that I could create a life without him. "This is nice," he said softly. "It is," I replied, pouring him some tea. "It's peaceful." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I should have said something sooner," he finally said. "About Monica, about everything. I didn't know how bad it got." I watched him for a long moment. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't innocent either. "You let her silence me," I said gently. "That silence cost me years." His face crumpled a little, like he hadn't expected me to say it aloud. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry. I believed him, and I forgave him, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I'm happy now, I said. Truly, but I won't shrink again to make anyone else comfortable. He nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. We talked for a while after that about work, the kids, my new group at the library. He promised to visit again. I didn't ask about Monica, and he didn't bring her up. I didn't need to know. A few days later, my phone rang. Grandma! It was Lily, my youngest granddaughter. Her voice was shy but curious. Mom says you're writing books now. That's kinda cool, I smiled. I think so. Can I read one? Only if you promise to ask questions. Big ones, she giggled. Deal. That week, I mailed signed copies to each of the grandkids, complete with handwritten notes tucked inside. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because they deserved to know the version of me Monica never let them see. Now they call sometimes. Ask about my classes, my poems, my opinions. We talk about books, movies, and once, to my surprise, tick-tock, I've become that grandma, the one they're proud to introduce to friends, the one who wears statement earrings and hosts storytelling nights, the one who is no longer invisible. Some mornings, I sit on my little balcony with a mug of coffee, watching the sun rise over the rooftops, and I think about the years I lost, the years I let myself disappear so someone else could shine. But I don't feel regret anymore. I feel awake, I feel full. I feel like I've finally come home, not to a house, but to myself. Because freedom isn't something you age out of. It isn't something you earn only once. It's something you choose again and again, no matter how long it takes. And me. I lost years, but I found myself again. And this time, I'm not giving her up. The event hall smelled faintly of coffee, fresh ink, and nervous excitement, the scent of stories waiting to be heard. I was one of 5 women being honored at the Tri-County Book Festival that day. A regional celebration, yes, but still a real stage, with rows of folding chairs, local press, and a banner with my name spelled correctly. I stood behind the curtain, adjusting the sleeves of my crimson blouse, the same one I wore during my last week teaching before retirement. It still fit, and it still made me feel like someone who had something to say. Outside, I could hear the crowd gathering. Lorraine peeked in. You're up in 5. I nodded and took one last look in the mirror. The lipstick in my hand was deep red, my favorite shade, worn thin from use. The same one I'd worn when I organized the first fundraising drive for Haven House. The same one I had stopped wearing when I moved into Adam's house, quietly letting go of color so I wouldn't embarrass anyone. I applied it slowly now, with no rush. Then I stepped out. The room was full: librarians, young writers, retired teachers, students clutching paperbacks. And in the third row, almost hidden behind a pillar, sat Monica. Her dress was beige, her hair perfectly set. Her posture was as straight as I remembered, but her face. Her expression was unreadable. No tight smile, no glare, just silence, watching. I didn't flinch, I didn't even blink. I walked straight to the podium. The moderator introduced me with warmth, reading aloud the festival's citation, for reclaiming the narrative of age with honesty, fire, and grace. When the microphone buzzed to life, I took a breath. I used to think that aging meant disappearing, I began. That with every year we were supposed to step further into the background, be quieter, softer, easier to ignore. I paused, letting the quiet land. But I learned the opposite. Aging, real aging, means stepping forward. It means owning every wrinkle, every scar, every story. It means no longer waiting for permission to speak. Heads nodded, some eyes glistened. I was once told to act my age, I continued. It was meant to shut me up, but instead it opened a door, and on the other side of that door was a voice I thought I'd buried. I held up a copy of my book, the spine well worn from being passed hand to hand across my community. I wrote this not just for women my age, but for anyone who has ever been told they're too much, too loud, too old, or too inconvenient. The applause was long. Some people stood. Others simply closed their eyes and smiled as if hearing something they'd needed for years. When I stepped off the stage, Monica was gone. I wasn't surprised. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was addressed by hand in tidy script, no return address. Inside was a single piece of heavy cream stationery. The note read, I didn't know who you were, I do now. Monica, no signature, no apology. Just 7 words. I sat down at my little kitchen table, letter in hand. And then I folded it, placed it in the back of my writing notebook, and got back to outlining my next piece, Aging Out Loud, Essays on Living Unapologetically. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Because some messages don't require answers, they require echoes. Monica had tried to shrink me. She'd used age as a weapon, mistaking years for weakness, but I had shown her what age really meant: resilience, rebirth, return. She thought act your age meant sit down and fade. But I stood up, I reclaimed space, I used my voice, I wore my colors and my earrings and my red lipstick. She'll remember that, not because I shouted, but because I stopped asking to be seen and chose to be seen. That's the lesson she'll carry quietly, bitterly, maybe even respectfully. She'll remember the woman she tried to dim standing on stage, bathed in light. She'll remember the applause, the words, the silence that followed, filled not with shame but with power. And as for me, I stood in front of the mirror once more, my lipstick in hand. I pressed it to my lips, steady and sure. Then I smiled, picked up my notebook, and headed out the door toward another stage, another room, another story, because I acted my age, and I will keep doing so loudly, boldly, and without permission. Forever.